Welcome in the second part of our tutorial series about the toothbrush. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. Thanks a lot for all the positive feedback and also the questions on YouTube in the comments. I really appreciate your enthusiasm to follow these lessons and I try my best to keep them up. So let's start here now in this lesson. We want to talk about the hair system or the groom system inside of Houdini. And for that, I want to show you first some tools which you find on the shelf. And before we dive into the example itself, I want to talk about shelf tools. I see a lot in forums, and also if people ask me for training, do you use shelf tools? And shelf tools seem to be an indicator of your professional experience. And people think that if you use a shelf tool is something which only newbies do. I don't think so. A shelf tool is like a preset, and the side effects guys try to build the shelf tools here for you so that you don't have to do the setups over and over again. These shelf tools are really flexible, but on the other side they want to teach you how to use the nodes inside of a setup. You don't need to use these shelf tools if you know exactly what you want or if you think that you can make a more effective setup, but a shelf tool itself helps you in production. And I know many productions which build their own shelf tools because they don't want to set up all the stuff over and over again. In this lesson, I want to show you how the hair system inside of Houdini works, and then in the next lesson we really can dive in and build your own hair system because we need bristles here and not hair. So let's try now in this scene a new hair system. For this I deactivate here the visibility of these two reference planes. The brush here is something we don't need, and then we activate our grid again. Let's take a torus. Okay. If you want to grow hair on a torus like this, we need a whole set of nodes. First, we will have to build the guides, and maybe you want to simulate the guides, and then between the guides you want to generate hair. And to do all the steps, we need here on the scene level our nodes. To see which nodes are used for that, we select now the torus, and you can go here to your hair utilities shelf. If this shelf is not here in your list, go here to the plus sign to the shelves and search for it in this list here. And then we have selected the torus, we click here add fur. It seems that nothing has happened, but be aware that there is a message here in the status bar of your viewport, which said that we now have to select if we have an animated skin geometry. Skin means the place where you want to place your hair. And we don't have animation going on, so this here is optional, so we press the enter key and everything is done. And then you see we have two nodes now here in our list, and we also see in our viewport here our first hair setup. So let's dive into this setup and try to understand what's going on. Let's start here inside of the torus. If I open up the torus, you see nothing is here, so everything is fine. Okay, let's go out of the torus, and the next node we have here is a guide groom node. And this guide groom node, let's deactivate the visibility of the other node here, generates these yellow lines here, which are the guides. You have to understand that hair exists between the guides, and you first shape your guides, which are splines, and then between them you generate your hair. And this generator of the guides here is done here inside of this guide groom. If you take a look into the node here, you find a whole bunch of options. But the most interesting one is here, rest skin VDB. What's going on? Why is here a volume? The thing is, if you later simulate your hair and the torus is moving or so, you want that these guides collide with the surface here. And you can have a simulation system inside of Houdini 18 with the help of Vellum or with the old wire solver. And for this we need a volume so that you have better collisions. And that's the reason why internally this node generates a volume for you. If you want to help the system, try to have something closed so that you really can make a volume or you deliver the volume by yourself. And to do that, you see here there's a source, and if you open that up, you can also show Houdini where your volume, your collision volume is, and you can use it. We don't simulate, so we don't need this volume. So let's go to the next step here. And here in the basic tab, you now see where the guides are generated. And we scatter guides on the surface. And like I've said, that's these yellow ones here. And with the help of the density, we can tell how many guides we want. You can also change here the mode. We can have one guide per point. So if we switch that here and activate here the points, you see that on every point here of our torus, we have now these points here, which represent the guides here. So we can really tell where we want to plant guides. And this is something we want to use later because we want to make bristles and we exactly want to tell the system where we want to have these bristles. So we can use points for that. Interesting. And we also can use external geometry. So if you have built your own guides, your own spline setup, you can activate this here and then tell Houdini where your spline setup is, which Houdini has to use as guides. Also a really interesting concept, and I used that, for example, for hair, which I generated in Blender, because the grooming system in Blender is really nice because you can work in real time, and then you use the splines which I bring over from Blender here as guides, and then I use the amazing groom system of Houdini for simulating and all the rest. So let's switch back here to scatter on surface to talk a little bit more about the rest here. Then we have here the guide properties. So we have the amount of points here on the guide. Remember, these are splines and we have 8 in the moment here, and the length. So make them longer to see better what's going on. And if you now activate and deactivate here the points, you see these are the amount of points here. And if you simulate later, you want that these guides really bend nicely, not too many segments, then the simulation is slow, but you don't want to see jaggy edges in the hair. And if the guides are too jaggy, you will see that later in the hair. So that's the reason why you can change here the segments. Another note from me, have you seen these drop downs here? We can set overrides by this. So let's talk about these overrides, and I think I want to use here the length as an example. If you deactivate the points first, go here and say we want to have for the length here an override. You can now say I want to have an attribute on the skin. You remember the surface on which the guides are planted is named the skin. Or you can use a texture if you like. So if you click here on the texture, you can load the texture which you have painted externally. For this, we need a UV map and so on. I think you can imagine that. But we go here to a skin attribute. And the funny thing is, if you go here to a skin attribute, the attribute which we have now here is named length scale. You can rename that if you like. I don't want to rename that. So let's look into what's happening if we change now the length, because this here is only a multiplier, or you can drive now the length with this multiplier and this multiplier. So how to get now a length scale on the surface? For this, we need points here for the torus. So let's go back here to the torus. We don't have too many points here. So let's dive into the torus here and we can, let's go directly here. Be lazy here because this is only showing you how this thing works. Okay, I'm back now here. And now you see Shift W. We have some more points. I think I want to have much more points here. Yeah, something like that. Okay. Now we have all the points here on our skin or our surface, and now we can paint attributes on this. And for this, we can now do these length scale by hand here on the torus themselves, or we can ask Houdini for help. And for this, we have this little button here. And if you click here, paint length attribute, you are now back in your torus. And we have now 2 new nodes here. And these nodes are really simple. One is an attribute create. And if you select this, you see we generate this length scale attribute here. And we initialize it with a value of 1. So on every of these points here, we now have a length scale attribute with a value of 1. We see that here in the geometry spreadsheet. Cool. And then we have here an attribute paint node, which was new inside of Houdini 18. If you remember, on my Houdini Fundamentals publication, I've made a new additional lesson for the new paint node. And so we now can use this paint node. And if you select this here with the handle tool, you see everything is red, which means now the whole surface has on the attribute. Let's look here which attribute it uses. So go here, length scale. That's correctly set for us. It's a float. That's also correct. So this red means every of these points here has a value of 1 in the moment. And now you can start painting. With the foreground color 1 and with the background color 0, you can now paint. Here you see on the left mouse it's paint, on the middle mouse button it's also paint. If you hold down Control, you have here smooth or erase, and if I now want to erase something, I hold down my middle mouse button here and I paint now with a value of 0. And now you see it changes here now, because blue, it's colder, it's infrared, means that there is now a value of 0. And we can make this a little bit broader if we like. Yeah. And now we have a length attribute here. Everywhere where it's red, it's 1. Where it's blue, it's 0. And now we can go back to our setup here. And now you see this length attribute is now driving this length here. So it's like a multiplier or vice versa. And if you look here now, you see that here in this area where I painted it, we don't see any hair. And we have an area where we have shorter hair because we had a brush which was not perfectly sharp. And if we now change the length here, you will see that you really keep this area here empty. And this is the way we normally tell Houdini where we want to have guides, where we want to have hair. And you see how cool this setup here works directly out of the box. You can do it with other ways, but yeah, this is only an introduction how these tools here work. Then if you don't like here these yellow guides, you can make them thicker with draw white curves here. Then you see you get bigger lines, which you can change here. But in my case, everything is okay. So let's go to the next node here. And this node here is a hair generate node. Like I've said, if you have a simulation going on, between these nodes are other nodes, because we have to change here the guides with our simulation. But in our case, this easy setup here is absolutely enough. So let's activate the hair generation. And we click this now here. And now you see that this hair generator is now using our guides to generate hair. And this hair is only generated between the guides. And because we don't have guides here close to each other, we don't get hair in this area. So let's look through the setup. You see here a link to the material, so it's using a hair shader, it's mantra, so you can directly render this. We have again here BDB, and then we have more than one tab, so let's go through that. General, here's the density, how many hairs you want to have. You can have a density or a total count if you like. We relax the whole thing so that the hair is relaxed. And then we use the guides which come in, and have you seen that the input here is on the right side? This is a common mistake which newbies do because they link them on the left side, these nodes, and the left side here is parent. You see, this is used if you want to have a parent-child relationship. For example, you want that the geometry now moves or rotates in space, and if you do that, you now see the guides use that and then the hair. But in some circumstances, these setups are standing still. The reason for this is that they are still generated in the rest position. And if you don't want that, you can use this port here to rotate and to transform the object. And it's really like a parent-child relationship. So if you say, okay, I want that this here is always a child of, for example, the torus, you can make a second connection here and say, if I now move the torus, rotate the torus or whatever, it's always relative to this one here through the transform. But we don't use that in the moment. So that's only the information why we use the right side here, which uses here the groom data and not the parent. So let's look more through that here. Then I've told you that between the guides you normally get the hair, and for this we have an influence radius. That means around every guide there's now a radius going on. It depends on the size of your object and how big your scene is. And around that we get now an area where you plant hairs, and we have a decay for that. We have a maximum guide count, how many guides are used for this area in which hair is generated, and so on. So this is how to plant the hair between the guides. You can play with this, and for everything here is an override. So you have seen how the overrides work, same thing here. And if you look now here through, the only thing I want to show you here is now the thickness. These are hairs, so you can now tell the system how thick the hair is, depending on the size of your scene. So this is the hair thickness, and here the form of the hair from the root to the tip. You can change this with this ramp here. And one additional thing here, this setup is meant to use in Mantra, and under render you will see that the hair itself is generated not here as splines, but in the render process. You see here generate geometry in Mantra. If you use external render engines and you really need the spline information inside of this setup, for example, if I later use RenderMan or so on, you can tell here the system that we really want to generate subgeometry. But yeah, this tutorial is about Mantra, so everything is fine. So now you have learned how this whole setup works. We have learned two nodes, the guide groom node and the hair generate node. And we have also learned how to get the information to the guides, how we can change the information here and the density, and that we can use points here for the guides. And now we are ready to start in the next lesson to generate our bristles on the toothbrush. See you in a moment.